Hey everybody, Andrarchy here, and today I want to talk about inflation and deflation, and then I want to wrap it up by talking about what Steem does to address the issues of inflation and deflation, but more importantly, what I call the Steem Backed Monetary System, so SBM, how the SBM handles the issues of inflation and deflation, because really inflation and deflation are words that are used to describe how currencies behave, and the term cryptocurrency really is a misnomer. What they really are crypto monies. The dollar is a currency. The Steem-backed dollar is a currency. Things like Bitcoin, things like Steem, cryptocurrencies whose price is determined solely by the market for that commodity, those aren't really currencies, and they certainly aren't monetary systems. Currencies like the US dollar, they can inflate and deflate. Cryptocurrencies, which are just digital commodities, their price just goes up and down in a generally wave-like fashion, assuming that digital commodities perform in the future as physical commodities have performed in the past. For example, if you look at the chart for gold, it's mostly a wave. You know, there are high peaks and low lows, because it's so dependent on human psychology, right? As I talked about it in a different video, the price of gold isn't very closely related to the practical uses of it, except for the ability to use it as money. But we don't really need gold for creating semiconductors, for building products, for rendering services. Really, the most probably popular use for gold is as a form of money. And so during times when that type of money is more desirable, when the demand for that type of money goes up, the price of gold relative to other commodities go up. And during times when the demand for that type of money is low, the price of it goes down. And so you see a wave-like pattern. But let's get to inflation and deflation, and this is a very simple analogy, right? It's obviously not a perfect description of any real economic system. It's a boiled down version that I believe makes it a bit easier to grasp relatively complex topics. And it really embodies how I think about it. My perspective on money and currency. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate. I'm not even saying it's a fact. I'm just explaining how I think about this stuff, and I have found that the predictive power of this model, which really isn't very far off from what both orthodox economists and unorthodox economists agree on. This is fairly standard Econ 101 level stuff, but unfortunately nobody remembers Econ 101. Nobody remembers the basics of money and currency, and people get distracted by all kinds of things, particularly jargon. The problem with kind of a mature society is that things get highly jargonized. So because special interests accumulate power, specific institutions grow their influence, and creating jargon is a good way of erecting invisible walls around your profession so that disruptors can't come in and steal your market share. So it creates barriers to entry for startups, for upstarts, for people who want to address the same problems but in a more efficient way. And so you see this in law. I went to law school. I was a licensed attorney in New York and New Jersey, and it was actually an issue there that some really great professors were advocating for, which is a movement towards plain language law, Law should be comprehensible to everyone. We as lawyers understand that what we're doing when we're looking at a contract, when we're looking at a legal document, is we're deciphering a language so that we can understand what's being said. We translate it into English so that a human being can actually understand it. It's not like this is really helping anyone. It adds to the hours that they can bill because it's so time consuming to read this Martian language. And what kind of legal system demands that ordinary human beings be incapable of understanding the documents that bind them? I can promise you, as an insider, that there is no rational reason for this. They might say, oh, well, you know, it helps us be more specific, it helps protect people from liability. Show me a study. Show me one study for this opinion. The legal profession is swamped with ideological beliefs that have zero scientific backing. They just make claims and they just assume that it's true. For example, if you ask somebody why we have intellectual property law, they're going to tell you that it's because it encourages innovation, that without intellectual property you would have no innovation. Now, I'm sure many people watching this video will understand how ridiculous that is on its face. However, if you just dig a little bit deeper, it's even more apparent to anyone else. And the only question you have to ask for that is, okay, well, when was intellectual property law invented? And it's hundreds of years ago in medieval England. Oh yeah, there was a lot of talk about innovation back then. There was a lot of technological advancement. No, it was done to protect certain people's interests. The people who it helped lobbied the powers that be for the laws to be created. That's just obvious. And it's fine too, by the way. We can acknowledge it. We can say, yeah, that's how things were. But we don't have to delude ourselves into thinking that there was some noble intent behind it. And the same is true of economics. They love talking in jargon. They love mathematizing everything. But if you look at the real innovative, state-of-the-art thinkers, the people who saw 2008 coming, their big critique is the over-reliance on algorithms, the over-reliance on mathematization, not because math is bad, but because the math they were using was not hard science. They were coming up with theories, with subjective theories that had very little evidentiary support, creating mathematical formulas based on those unsubstantiated theories, and then choosing to believe that the mathematical equations were fact, were reality. And one of those equations was used to convince everybody in the financial sector that mortgage-backed securities were safe. It was that religious belief in a mathematical formula that exacerbated the effects of 2008. I'd love to talk about in the future about how 2008 was essentially inevitable. Most economic developments on a large scale, on the macro scale, are pretty much inevitable, but it certainly didn't help. It allowed the bubble to inflate further because the people doing the inflating had a religious belief in this mathematical formula, and so they felt, well, the sky's the limit. I can blow up this money to as much as I want because it's backed by a stable asset, home prices. And just because one home price falls, that doesn't mean other home prices fall. And of course, they were pretending that recessions don't happen. And that's what happened. A recession happened. The prices of homes fell on a broad basis, and because these monetary instruments were so highly levered, it wound up destroying a large amount of money, removing a large amount of money out of the economy, which created the financial crisis and exacerbated the recession that happened. But let's get to inflation and deflation. Sorry for the rant. In this hypothetical, we have a population of 4 organisms. These organisms, they have something that they generate naturally, biologically. And what we call that byproduct is value. So organism number 1 creates 2 units of value, organism 2 creates 3 units of value, organism 3 creates 1 unit, 4 creates 2 units. And we call these things value because they have uses to other members of the population. So for example, this value, this 1 unit, might represent an ear of corn. This one might represent lentils. This one might represent a pair of shoes. And so if 4 can acquire this value, it will acquire lentils, which it can use to fuel itself. But the question then becomes, all right, well, the population is creating things of value. These things of value would add to the lives of the other organisms in the population. Now, how do those organisms get their hands on that value? If we're just looking at this portion right here, they have no choice but to do what we refer to as barter. They have to trade value for value. They have to find one another geographically. They have to travel to one another. And then they have to hope that the other organism still has the thing of value that they want, and that that organism wants something of value from them. Not only that, but you have to have the right amount too. So the shoemaker might not want 1 ear of corn for their pair of shoes. That pair of shoes takes a significant amount of time to create, especially depending on the age, whereas 1 ear of corn, well, you farm many ears of corn at a time. So if you head to the shoemaker with 1 ear of corn, he's going to say, no, that's not enough. We don't have a deal. So it's incredibly inefficient. But let's imagine that another organism comes along. It's the same type of organism, but let's call it a king organism. And the king comes along and he says, I provide 2 services. One is I protect you from threats. And by the way, you don't really have a choice here. But these organisms are probably thinking, yeah, there are threats. And there's an irony to protection rackets, right? You do need protection from other organisms, whether they're of the same species as you or different species. The only thing that can protect you is something that is itself dangerous. So the fact that there is a subtle threat to the protection racket actually can prove its very point, right? Don Corleone was capable of executing violence. Now, you try to make sure that that violence is directed towards your enemies, but if he wasn't capable of being violent towards you, then he probably wouldn't be very good at providing protection. It's kind of a tragic irony. So he comes along and he says, I'll protect you, but I'll also create money. I will mint money, and it'll be, let's say, gold pieces, gold coins. But all of the value of the currency isn't generated by the underlying precious metal. He also puts a stamp on it, a seal, and that is proof that it's legitimate. Importantly, it's proof that he'll accept it as taxes. So he's immediately creating demand for this currency because he will accept it for payment of taxes. And then he puts a seal of approval on it because minting coins, creating a seal, it's actually really hard. And so that helps prevent counterfeiting. Okay, so he creates this money, but then how to distribute it, how to inject it into the economy. He decides to provide 1 gold piece per unit of value created. Organism 1 gets 2 gold coins because it creates 2 units of value. The king exchanges 2 gold coins for 2 units of value. The king then gets the things of value, and organism 1 gets 2 gold coins. Organism 2 gets 3 gold coins, organism 3 gets 1 gold coin, organism 4 gets 2 gold coins. The reason he wants to do this, the reason he does it this way, is because he is linking up the money with the creation of value. He is trying to make the money supply reflect the value created by the population. And that's why I will refer to him as a benevolent monarch. Because he's actually trying to create a healthy economic system. Now, if he's smart, the reason he's doing that is because he understands that this is going to help the population be more productive and help them pay more taxes to him. But he's not just irrationally cruel to his subjects. Now we have a situation where the total money supply perfectly reflects the total value that had been generated by the population. The monarch now has the value for which it exchanged gold pieces, and the population has the gold pieces. But this organism has a very special property. It continues to produce value over time. It excretes value the same way that plants excrete oxygen. And we call that productivity. Productivity is the ability to produce value over time. And so, even though this population has been given gold pieces for the value it created in the past, it continues to create things of value. But now they're in a special situation where they no longer have to barter for their goods. Organism 1 doesn't have to hope that when it goes to organism 2, it has exactly what organism 2 wants. If organism 1 sells corn, as long as organism 2 has some gold pieces, organism 1 will gladly accept however many gold pieces they agree for the product. And they understand how much value each piece has just because how much it took them to earn it from the monarch. It's a very vague approximation of value. There's obviously no markets, there's no price streams, there's just feeling. And maybe also, if the monarch is smart, he uses the value that he acquires from the population to build a castle with protective walls and to include within it a marketplace where all of these organisms can come together to trade so that they don't all have to find each other. So you solve the geographical issue and you resolve the fungibility issue, the issue that a diverse economy of products actually makes it harder to trade value, because the more diverse products you have, the harder it is to explain to people the value of it, right? So if you invent some really cool new shoe and you go, well, I want a few ears of corn for this, the farmer might actually be more comfortable selling to somebody who sells a very ordinary shoe, which has a very established value. With money, with currency, you don't have that problem. Everybody knows what they think the money is worth, and everybody knows that everybody else accepts this money. It makes commercial transactions much easier. And so here we see that the population continues to create value, but now instead of having to rely on the monarch to purchase it for currency, they can use the currency that the monarch provided to them to better trade with one another. And organism 2 exchanges 1 gold piece for 1 unit of value from organism 1. It exchanges 1 gold piece for 1 unit of value from organism 3. And organism 4 exchanges 1 gold piece for 1 unit of value created by organism 3. And that leads us to this situation here, where you can start to see that the money supply does not accurately reflect the total amount of value being created by the economy. Organism 2 now has 1 gold piece, but it has 2 units of value. Organism 1 has 3 gold pieces, so it's richer than other members of the population, but it has no things of value because it exchanged everything it created of value for currency. And so you've got extra value that isn't covered by the money supply. When you go back to this scenario here, this very simple transaction where all the money, all the value created by the population is exchanged for currency by the monarch, at this point, the total money supply accurately reflects the total value that the population created, because all of that value was purchased by the monarch in exchange for the total money supply of 8 gold pieces. Now, we've still got the same 8 gold pieces, but we also have this value that's been created by the population. And to see the effects that has, let's go one step further and imagine more trading. So the population is still creating things of value, but the money supply remains constant. So we have 1 here, right? 1 can be thought of as kind of a surplus organism. It likes creating value and exchanging it for currency, whereas 2 can kind of be seen as a deficit organism. It prefers to exchange its currency for things of value. Neither are wrong. They're just different, right? Things of value have value. Maybe he's acquiring lots of filmmaking equipment so that he can make a movie which will make a lot of money in the future. But now 1 is in a position where it has so much of the money supply that the other members of the population don't have as much money to buy the value that he's creating. And so what does he do? Well, if he wants to sell his value, which he has a track record of doing, he does what? He lowers his prices. And so he agrees to sell his 1 unit of value to organism 2 for half of a gold piece. Organism 3 has a very similar dynamic. And so organism 3 as well exchanges 1 unit of value for half of a gold coin with organism 2. And that interaction right there, multiplied out toward the rest of the economy, is what we refer to as deflation. Now, there are lots of different types of deflation and inflation. I don't want to get wrapped up in all of that. I want to keep it simple. And for me, the most important form of deflation, the most interesting form of deflation, is when the money buys less. And that's what we see happening here. What used to buy 1 unit of value now can buy 2. 1 gold coin is now worth 2 units of value when it used to be worth 1 unit of value. And what that means is that the value of the currency has gone up by 100%. That is massive deflation. Another important consequence of this development, which might seem insignificant, but is actually very significant, especially when we start looking at the Steem Backed Monetary System, which is that in order to do this transaction, you need to deface the currency. You can cut a gold coin in half, but you're effectively destroying the seal of the institution that is backing the currency up, right? A lot of the value of a currency comes from the faith, trust, and confidence in the institution that creates the currency. So in order to facilitate this transaction, which I think most of us can agree is better than nothing, of course this is what happens. It's logical, even if you acknowledge that you're hurting the value of the thing by defacing it and decreasing the faith, confidence, and trust in the organization that backs it up. So to sum up, the consequence of a static money supply in a population that continues to create value is deflation and a chipping away at the faith in the currency that makes this entire economy function. And so now we see that 1 has 3.5 gold coins, 2 now has no gold coins. Despite its ability to produce value over time, it produced 3 units of value initially. But now it has no money, it just has things of value. 3 has 3.5, 4 has 1 gold coin plus some value. But let's imagine a new wrinkle, which is population growth. And population growth can essentially happen by two means: reproduction and immigration. Let's just imagine that the population grows by 100%. 4 new organisms enter the economy. And just like 1, 2, 3, and 4, these organisms have the ability to create value. These organisms are also productive. And so they come into the economy and they produce things of value. And so organisms 1, 2, 3, and 4 exchange their gold coins for the things of value at the new price of the currency. So organism 1 gives half of a gold coin to organism 5, half of a gold coin to organism 6. Organism 3 gives half of a gold coin to organism 7. And organism 4 gives half of a gold coin to organism 8. We continue this trajectory of having an ever-increasing amount of value being generated that isn't reflected in the money supply. But we have a new wrinkle, which is that since the money supply has remained 8 gold pieces, but the population has grown by 100%, per capita GDP has now gone down. Per capita GDP is now 1 gold piece per person. So despite the fact that that the benevolent monarch has improved the situation by injecting a currency and better facilitating trade, that currency has deflated in value, right? And obviously a stable currency is critical for trading, because if you know that the price of your currency is fluctuating over time, it makes it harder to know whether you're exchanging the currency for the right amount of value. And possibly more importantly, you now have a scenario where people might be tempted to hoard the currency just so that they could sell it in the future because they realize that the value of the currency is going up over time. And so you actually create an incentive not to trade by merely doing nothing with your monetary system. So what we have here is a monetary system that served its function. It facilitated trade within the population. It made it easier for them to exchange value with one another. It enabled them to acquire a protector. And yet, as the population continued to create value, as the population continued to grow, both of which are good things, we created a situation where the currency became unstable, its value deflated, and people felt poorer because per capita GDP went down. Also, they were forced to wound the very currency that enabled all of these transactions. In order to continue using the currency, they have to break it up, they have to injure it, they have to deface it, they have to decrease the confidence and trust people are going to have in it. And I would say that those are the 3 major issues facing at least this monetary system. Even though it started off good, even though it had positive effects, it still led to an unstable price. It led to the population to effectively destroy the very currency that was enabling all of this commerce. I mean, to take it to the extreme example, if this process went on for long enough, the slivers of money that they were using would be so small that counterfeiting would be easy, verifying the quality of the coin would be difficult. Obviously, the seal is destroyed, right? Like when a hegemon creates a currency, that seal is a reflection of their power and their wealth, because it wasn't so easy to mint a coin. It wasn't so easy to stamp it with some kind of pattern. And so that was the first anti-counterfeiting measures. Now, you chop up that currency into little bits and pieces and you lose that value. The value of a currency is a combination. It's a combination of the value of the underlying asset that backs it, in this case it's gold, but it's also the value created by the seal. The seal itself is worth a lot. First of all, it enables people to know that they can pay taxes with it, taxes being one of the biggest expenses of a population. So that already establishes a certain amount of value. So a lot of the value of a currency comes not from the underlying commodity, but from the proof that it's not counterfeited, from the ability to pay your taxes, from it, stuff like that. So now let's talk about how Steem and the Steem Backed Monetary System addresses these issues. First, let's talk about what this system demands, what it requires. First, it requires a hegemon, an individual or a group of individuals with absolute power over the population. The ability to do whatever they want to whomever they want. You also need some kind of treasury, a place to store the asset that backs the currency and all of the expenses that entails. And you need tax collectors. All of this adds to the expense of the system. In other words, you have small groups of powerful people determining what has value and what doesn't. And they have to maintain complex institutions like treasuries, like some kind of taxation apparatus, and they need to have a moral compulsion to distribute currency in direct proportion to value, which we just don't have, which people don't have. And so it inevitably breeds corruption, inefficiency, and you wind up not preventing things like inflation and deflation, because obviously whoever is in charge of the currency is going to favor people close to them. People who are in their in-group, as anthropologists refer to it, people within their specific tribe. You know, if lawyers are in charge of the money, you know they're going to say, oh, lawyers, they contribute way more to society than anybody else. Here's currency, here's currency. If they're a banker, obviously they're going to funnel more currency to the banking sector. And if they're dentists, they're going to do the same thing. Hey man, you can't function without your teeth. It's incredibly important. So it may even be a sincere belief, but it's inevitably going to result in what Austrian economists refer to as a misallocation of resources. In addition, who's to say that they're going to produce new money at the proper rate, at the ideal rate, that they're going to resist the temptation to overprint or resist the temptation to underprint. If they underprint and they have a lot of money, then that money goes up in value. They can buy more with the same amount of money. Both tendencies are perfectly kind of reasonable. And so how does Steem resolve these issues? How does the Steem-backed monetary system address these problems? Well, in several different ways. The most innovative, arguably the most important feature, is that it replaces the small groups of powerful people who are making the subjective determinations of what's valuable and what's not, which is, by the way, always going to be subjective. The determination of what's valuable and what's not is entirely up to the individual. It does not exist outside of the organism's brain. These are abstract concepts, these are abstract judgments. And so they are inevitably subjective. And the Steem Backed Monetary System embraces that reality and says, okay, if we're going to distribute the currency based on the productivity of the population, of the individuals within the population, what is the most accurate way of making that determination and the least biased way? And leveraging the wisdom of the crowd to solve that problem is currently the best solution imaginable for two reasons. One is the crowd is inherently unbiased. If you're averaging the judgments of everyone, you can't say that it's biased. The biases inherent in the decisions are the biases that are shared by the entire population. It is the subjective determination of the crowd as opposed to the subjective determination of any individual within it or any group within it. Now, I'm not saying that the crowd is always right, but science continues to demonstrate to us that the crowd is better at making decisions than any individual within it or any group of individuals within it. And so if we're looking for the best possible situation, the crowd is a very intelligent place to look. Not only is it likely to be the most accurate gauge of what's valuable and what's not, but it's also the fairest. There's nobody to point a finger at. There's no hegemon. There's no tax collectors. It's the crowd. If you don't like it, then you don't like the crowd, then you don't like the population. You're free to leave. And if people who don't like the system leave it, then what remains are individuals who like the system, who agree that the crowd is an accurate determinator of value. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that doesn't address the problem of money creation. You need the money supply to grow. And so the way Steem resolves that situation is by regularly increasing the money supply at a steady pace, at a predictable pace. Now, I'm not an expert in Steem, I'm not an expert in the algorithm. I know that they increase the money supply by 100% a year. Actually, they increase the supply of Steem 100% of the year. This is another important distinction that I think too many people are ignoring. When we talk about money printing in the US, we're talking about the printing of US dollars. The currency in the Steem Backed Monetary System is not Steem, it's Steem dollars. So it's the underlying commodity that they're increasing the supply of. The practical consequences of that are not necessarily clear to me, but I know that it's not the exact same thing as the Federal Reserve printing more currency. The question then becomes, are they perfectly increasing the money supply in proportion to the amount of value being created by the population and the increasing growth of the population size? But Steem and the Steem Backed Monetary System has another trick up its sleeve, which helps mediate the fact that it is unlikely that the increase of the money supply is perfectly in tune with the creation of value and the growth of the population, which is, like most cryptocurrencies, it is highly divisible. So we have two problems. We have deflation, inflation, three problems, and this problem of destroying the very currency that you're using to facilitate trade. And that problem is resolved with Steem, because dividing Steem, just like dividing Bitcoin, does not impact the ability to use it to facilitate trade. Finally, all of this stuff is traded on markets. Everybody is obsessed with trying to figure out if Steem is going to go down, Steem dollars are going to go up or down, what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen as Steem continues to be printed. And my response is always the same. That's what traders are for. That's what people who are obsessed with the asset are for. I know how valuable Steem is based on how valuable traders think it is, and I defer to their judgment on that. If they say that one Steem is worth $3, I don't really care if they're right or wrong. That's the market value of it. Part of the genius of the SBM is that we have this currency that is designed to remain stable and is pegged to the US dollar. I don't have to know what's going on with Steem. I don't really care what's going on with Steem. I just want to make sure that it holds some amount of value so that when I go to exchange my Steem backed dollar, I could get some kind of currency that I want out of it. And yes, all of us talking about this stuff is great and making sure that it is well designed, and if there are changes that need to be implemented, they're implemented. But the beauty of a well-designed system is that you don't need to understand how it works. I don't understand how the value of the US dollar is maintained. It doesn't stop me from using it to buy stuff. The reason why it's important that there's a distinction between Steem and Steem-backed dollars is because that acts as a buffer. That acts as kind of a shock absorber between the underlying commodity, which is growing in supply, with the currency that's used by the population. If they are printing too much steam, the value of the steam will go down. However, that will not affect the value of the currency. If steam is worth 50 cents and I want to trade out one steam-backed dollar for one US dollar, I'm going to be given 2 steam, which I can then trade out on an exchange for US dollars. If the price drops by half, which is crazy, that's a huge price drop, right? They overprint too much, way too few people join up, everybody happens to be unproductive that month or whatever. The price of steam goes down to 25 cents per steam. I still have one steam-backed dollar. I go to cash out. They give me 4 steam as opposed to 2, and I can still cash out for my dollar. So they've helped mitigate the negative consequences of either overprinting or underprinting. And at the same time, since everything is so heavily traded, they're constantly getting this feedback. The traders are constantly reevaluating the decisions that are being made. All this information can be used to improve the algorithm, make it better, make the system function more properly. So I'd like to finish with my views, my opinions on whether Steem and the Steem-backed monetary system are somehow inherently inflationary or inherently deflationary. And most importantly, I think that people who are looking at the money printing aspect of it and immediately jumping to the conclusion that it is inflationary, it's assuming that one piece of information can tell you everything you need to know about a complex network of interactions. And what I would say is that based on this kind of model of understanding an economy, that what matters isn't how much money is being printed, but how closely tied that money is to productivity in the population and population growth. The faster a population grows, the more demand there is for the currency. And so if enough currency isn't created, you will have per capita incomes going down over time. If the population continues to produce more value than is created in the form of money, you will continue to have deflation. If far more money is created relative to the value created by the population, then you'll have inflation. But again, the problem with applying that simplistic logic to the Steem-backed monetary system is that it ignores that what is printed is the underlying commodity and not the currency. The question with inflation and deflation, which is so often missed in the American economy when people are criticizing the American economy, is that it doesn't really matter how much money is created. What matters is how much of that money makes it into the money supply. Right? So a lot of money was created after 2008, but it was effectively segregated. It was effectively isolated within the banking system. And so it didn't make its way into the broader money supply, and so it didn't lead to inflation. So this money is created, but it's not simply helicopter dropped all over the population. The money is created, and then the crowd determines who gets it based on its subjective interpretation of who's creating the most value. And so what you have with the Steem Backed Monetary System is a system wherein the money supply grows at a steady pace. You have traders who are constantly reevaluating the market value of the underlying commodity as well as the currency. You have a currency that is closely tied to productivity. Only the most productive individuals are being rewarded. And you have a currency which is designed to be stable regardless of what is happening to the underlying commodity. A Steem-backed dollar is always worth a dollar. And if the system can maintain that position, then a lot of arguments kind of go away. And of course, what we all want is for the Steem-backed dollar to be stable. As of now, we want it to hover close to the US dollar. And so if it's not going to, everybody has a vested interest in fixing that. On top of all of that, even if the right amount of money is not created, even if the most productive individuals aren't getting their proper share, because the currency is highly divisible, it still can be used with a high level of confidence and trust, even if it is losing or gaining value. This is how I look at this monetary system. I hope you guys find it useful. It is simplistic, but believe it or not, economics is kind of simple. I've heard it referred to by economists as just codified common sense. And so if you're looking at it and it seems too technical and it seems too jargonized, then you're probably looking at a bad explanation. Somebody who isn't really interested in increasing knowledge and increasing information, but who's instead interested in glorifying themselves, putting themselves up as an expert. Economics is simple. Human beings create value because they are productive, and a currency that is distributed among the population in direct proportion to productivity, as well as population growth, is going to be a stable and healthy currency that is going to engender healthy, smooth, frictionless economic transactions, and so foster economic growth and prosperity and wealth. The questions of inflation and deflation often miss the point. The question is this system fostering productivity? Is it fostering the creation of value? Is it rewarding the people who are helping their community the most?